Good morning to our viewers in the United States, and good afternoon to our viewers in Europe. I'm Steve Sokol, the president of the American Council on Germany. On behalf of both ACG and Atlantik-Brücke, I am pleased to welcome you to today's discussion. This is the last in a series of events that have taken place since April as part of our joint virtual 2020 German-American Conference. As many of you know, our conference was supposed to take place in person in mid-May in Washington, D.C. Because of the pandemic, we moved all of our programming online and have hosted a range of discussions addressing issues such as the global economy, national security, identity politics, as well as diversity and inclusion. With today's event, we're coming full circle. The chairman of both organizations convened via Zoom to talk about the state of the German-American relationship and the US election in April. Today, we hope that they'll reflect on the events of 2020 and look ahead to what we might expect in 2021. Our two chairmen hardly need an introduction. Sigmar Gabriel is the chairman of Atlantik-Brücke. He served as Vice-Chancellor of Germany from 2013 to 2018, and concurrently as Federal Foreign Minister from 2017 to 2018, and as Minister for Economic Affairs and Energy from 2013 to 2017. Herzlich willkommen. And John Emerson from LA, so it's very early. He's the vice chairman at Capital Group International and serves as the chairman of the American Council on Germany. Previously, he served as the US Ambassador to Germany from 2013 to 2017. John, thanks for being with us early today.
You can say herzlich willkommen to me too.
Okay, herzlich willkommen to you as well. To guide us through the conversation, I'm delighted to welcome Christiane Meier. Christiane has been the head of ARD's studio here in New York since 2018, but she has extensive experience in the United States. From 2000 to 2007, she was a correspondent and then head of the ARD's studio in Washington, D.C. Between these two postings in the US, she worked in the ARD studio in Berlin, and from 2012 to 2018, she led ARD's morning show, Morgenmagazin. Christiane began her career in journalism in radio, and in 2017, she was recognized with a German television prize for best moderation of the interviews she conducted on ARD's Morgenmagazin. Christiane, thank you for being with us.
Good morning, and thank you for having me. It's an honor and a pleasure to talk to all of you. And so to get started, I wanted to quote something, might be a little bit overquoted in Germany, but I wanted to quote Kurt Schumacher, actually, who said, "Politics always starts with recognizing reality." And to my guests, I would put forward the question, and please answer it shortly. When you look at the relationship status right now of the German-American relationships, how would you qualify it? And maybe, John, you want to start.
Well, thank you, Christiane, and thanks for being here with us. For those who don't know, Christiane was literally one of the first people I met before moving to Germany in 2013. She had been posted to Washington, D.C. then, and I met her and her sons with my wife, Kimberly. And literally our very last interview, I think, at the ambassador's residence a day or two before we left with Morgan Magazine, Christiane brought the whole show to our residence. And so you've been a dear friend over the years, and it's great to be with you. And Sigmar, we work closely together during my time there. You're an extraordinary leader. Not just a leader of the party, a leader of government, but a leader in the transatlantic relationship. And it's really been an honor for me to work with you in my role here with the American Council on Germany and with your role as chairman of Atlantik-Brücke. So as always, it's just wonderful to be with you as well. Now, how do I view the state of the relationship? Heck of a lot better than it was before November 3rd, I think it would be one honest way to answer that. I think what's troubling is this. There have been several polls. We commissioned one jointly with Atlantik-Brücke in conjunction with the last joint conference that we actually were able to have in Berlin a couple of years ago. And then the Pew Research Organization commissioned another poll, and it was a little topsy-turvy in that if you ask most Americans about the relationship with Germany, they feel pretty good about it. They like Germany. I think the number is somewhere in the high 70s or low 80%. They like Germany. They have great respect for Germany. Angela Merkel clearly is the most recognized. Maybe Vladimir Putin is more recognized as an international leader, but she is certainly the most admired international leader. If you ask most Americans, we have, as my wife and I both like to repeat often, over 60 million Americans with German heritage, and we feel pretty good about Germany. Not so much in Germany. The same poll also showed that about 80% of Germans feel that the relationship is in very, very bad shape, and that is something that we clearly need to deal with. I think some of it has to do with the tensions that rose and were exacerbated during the Trump administration. But some of it has to do with fundamental underlying issues, which I think will still persist, and hopefully we can get to today. And the $64,000 question, I think, for a lot of Germans who follow this, is how much of the experience of the last 4 years is unique to the personality and approach of Donald Trump, and how much of it is a reflection of structural changes that have occurred in the United States that we, who are hopefully not just advocates for, but stewards of the transatlantic relationship, need to address.
So Sigmar Gabriel, what is your perspective from the other side of the Atlantic? How has the look across the Atlantic changed recently, or has it changed after Europe more or less collectively exhaled after the election? Is anything changing right now, or are we still exactly where we were?
First of all, let me say good morning to our friend John, and it's always a pleasure to meet you. I have to say that you were willing to meet us early in the morning through the last months, because whenever we ask you, could you give us some advice what's happening in the US, you said, of course, yes, when? And we said, oh, maybe in the afternoon. It was always in the morning in Los Angeles. Now, thank you very much. And we really much appreciate what you did during this year, especially this year, to inform us and to give us some kind of optimism in respect to the outcome of the US elections. Now, I mean, of course, I think there is something in the relation between Europe, or especially Germany and the US, which will put us Europeans in a very different position. And this is something which is, I would say, normal. There is a new challenge coming from China, and it's much more seen by the Americans than by us Europeans. That has to do with a different perspective to China. For us, China is a kind of frenemy, economic partner, more than for the US, I would say, and a political opponent and antipode. But it's more difficult than the old times with the Soviet Union on the other side of the fence. They were absolutely clear, we were the good guys, they are the bad, and we felt much stronger than they. We had only little exchange by gas and energy, but on the economic side, we felt much stronger, and we were much stronger. Today, the situation with China is different. They are main partner in economics. There is no fence, and of course they are political enemies, and we see how China tries to get a bigger influence in all the international institutions, and they want to withdraw from what we call the liberal order, and they try to get influence to all the standards in the international trade and so on and so forth. So that the US is shifting to the Indo-Pacific, it's first of all normal, and secondly, it's in our interest. they will be less European orientated and much more Indo-Pacific orientated, but that's in our interest because we do not have a strong footprint in that region, and only the US is able to balance China in this region. But this will have a consequence for us.
I heard,
they will ask us to do much more in our neighborhood. And I think the relationship between the US and Europe is in a very difficult situation, because some of us are only hoping that the good old times would come back, and some others will not accept the new role of Europe and Germany, because of course this is an inconvenient role, much more inconvenient than it was before, when the Americans did all the difficult jobs in the world. So that's the reason why the relationship is in a difficult situation.
Joe Biden said he's not planning an immediate move when it comes to China, meaning that nothing is going to happen right now. So as you already mentioned, Sigmar Gabriel, the geopolitical challenge China poses right now will be something that will be very important for the German-American relationships, but also for the European-American relationships. And since we started with China, maybe, John, you can give us the American perspective. What has to happen and how important is the German-American relationship?
Well, as it relates to China, let me just set that table a little bit first. I often distinguish between the Biden approach to foreign policy in general and the Biden approach to trade and China as it relates to what we've had in the last 4 years. There will be a sharp and immediate change in approach to foreign policy from what we saw during Trump, just as the Trump approach was a sharp and immediate change from the approach that we'd had for 40 years under both Democratic and Republican administrations, that valued alliances, that valued our values, that valued the importance of multilateral institutions. And we will see that take place immediately. But on China and on trade, you're going to see a difference in degree, a difference in tone for sure, coming from America, but not necessarily a difference in kind. And what I mean by that is that there has generally become a consensus, a bipartisan consensus in the United States, that this concept we had for 40 years, that the more we engage China, the more they will become like us, particularly as it relates to, engaging in rule of law. And acting like a market economy, we now recognize that is not going to happen, and that it requires a difference in approach to China. So that's the piece that I think is going to persist. But we're not going to see these across the board tariffs. We're not going to see the kind of tone. And the biggest difference in terms of the Biden foreign policy and the Trump foreign policy relating to China is Joe Biden wants to, in effect, make peace with our European allies, and Germany, of course, is at the top of that list, and the EU and France, obviously, as well, and join together to jointly bring the clout of our collective markets to bring pressure on China to play more by the rules. Instead of pulling out of the WTO, we will re-engage in the WTO and work to reform it and work to strengthen its enforcement mechanisms. Those kinds of things. And I think that'll be a big difference. And just to put a pin in that, Tony Blinken, who's our good friend, who's about to become, we hope, if he gets confirmed by the Congress or by the Senate, the next Secretary of State of the United States, in a speech to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce a few weeks ago, said one of President-elect Biden or President Biden's first acts would be to stop the, quote, artificial trade war with Europe. So I would say, particularly given Germany's economic clout with China, I mean, I understand that China's Germany's largest trading partner, that Germany will be very, very important in this. I can give you two instances that came up during my time as ambassador. One was our work with Germany to preclude China from being declared, quote, a market economy because of the way they dealt with aluminum and in particular steel. And we've imposed aluminum and steel tariffs on everybody, That's not the issue. Germany isn't the issue with aluminum and steel tariffs. It's China that's the problem there. And I don't know this for a fact, but I would imagine that's one of the things that Tony Blinken was referring to when he said, let's stop the artificial trade war with Europe and focus where it really needs to be focused. And then the second issue is our work together with Germany, and Sigmar might even recall this. We all met, it was my next to last week as ambassador, when there was a Chinese acquisition of a German company that had sensitive technology that we, the United States, were declassified intelligence to try to demonstrate that this should not be, that this acquisition should not go through. And it was about 3 days before it was scheduled to go through. And Minister Gabriel was in a position to first delay it, and then Germany took a look at it and decided that they agreed with us that it shouldn't go through. So, I mean, we both know that there are issues with China that we have cooperated on in the past, and I don't think pushing back jointly against China necessarily means that we all completely decouple and move away from the global environment. But there's got to be a middle ground between a new Cold War, and I hate that term. I think it minimizes what we lived through during the old Cold War, and just simply engaging with China without regard to the consequences or imposing consequences to their behavior.
So, Sigmar Gabriel, do you think Germany and America can overcome their dissent on some issues like 5G, Huawei, other stuff, in order to form an alliance that can push back on China and also become stronger that way?
And I totally agree what John said, that it's necessary to join hands not only between the US and Europe, but also with Japan, South Korea, Australia, and New Zealand, to balance the power of China. I personally would say it's impossible to put China under arrest. It's a 1.4 billion citizen country, and it's impossible to put them under house arrest. But to balance them, to show the red lines, and to bring them to the negotiation table at the WTO. And I very much appreciate that the United States administration will say we will lift the blockade in the WTO by having these courts to decide about trade disputes, and then of course to reform the WTO. And as John said, China is asking for being a market economy, but it's behaving like a state communist market. And if 4 of 7 parts of the world economy is not driven by market-based rules, not by a level playing field, it's impossible to do it in a fair way with many other parts of the world economy. So to join hands with the Americans, not to go into a trade war, but to say there are the red lines. If you come to negotiate with us, that's fine. There are economic opportunities for both sides, but it's impossible to do it in the way you did it in the past. And I would say China, we never should underestimate China, yes, but I would say we should not overestimate them as well. I mean, they are not in an absolutely strong position. If you look from a geopolitical perspective, they have, I would not say enemies, but yeah, most of them are enemies to China where they are. Russia, India, Pakistan, even North Korea is not an ally of Beijing or Vietnam and others. So to have disputes with the US, with Europe, with the rest of the world is also difficult for this country. So I would say that this idea to have a common attitude, a common strategy towards China, not decoupling, but showing them that they have to follow common rules. And then on the other side, of course, maybe to find an answer why it was so difficult, and it is so difficult to find a competitive alternative to Huawei here in Europe. I mean, that we are in this mess. That's not the fault of China. It's our fault. It's that a continent like Europe is 5 or more years behind the G5 technology of China. That's something which makes me personally angry. I said that we did something wrong in the past, and it must be possible to join hands with the Americans also in this field.
There's
some work to be done for sure. But John, if I may just interfere here briefly, what we haven't heard is the word human rights. I mean, when it comes to China, that is something people are really expecting from a future administration, also from Europe, and especially the opposition in Hong Kong, but also the Uyghurs. So will that play any part? Because if you only talk about trade, that might be a little bit too little.
Let me just respond or underscore the point that Sigmar just made, and then I'd be happy to address that in depth. But in terms of why isn't there, it's not enough to go to the Munich Security Conference as our Secretaries of State and Secretary of Defense did last February, probably the last joint conference any of us went to, and say, don't use Huawei when there's no alternative. And the American Council on Germany and AICGS, as well as Atlantik-Brücke, we hosted a breakfast at the Munich Security Conference, and this was the topic. The idea of why haven't we jointly pulled together to develop a credible alternative, a cost-effective alternative to Huawei? So I agree with that 100%. So set that one aside. Look, the reason China's not going to take over the world and so on and so forth. The reason that we and Europe have such strength is because we have values-based alliances. And those values are not just democracy and market economy and rule of law. They also involve human rights. And I'd say the incoming administration has been very, very clear that human rights will be a fundamental, forward-leaning aspect of our foreign policy in every respect. And so, there's just no question that I think you're going to see an acceleration of the focus on human rights. Obviously, the Trump administration has talked about the Uyghurs. Mike Pence makes a powerful speech. Donald Trump basically says, well, we don't really care about them. I mean, literally within a week of one another. So there will not be confusion about our message there. And as you know, Christiane, this is something with my wife, Kimberly's involvement in Human Rights Watch, this is something that Germany and the United States are very much in line with. And I do see human rights rising up because it is one of the fundamental 4 pillars of our values-based alliances.
Would you like to comment on the human rights part, Sigmar Gabriel?
Yeah, but let me be very frank and clear. That's maybe the most difficult question in these globalized economy, how to deal on the one hand side with our interconnected economies. On the other hand side, what's about human rights? It's not only with China. Look to Saudi Arabia, for example. Or if we will come back to the Iran and to the nuclear deal, I mean, of course, it's fine that hopefully the Iranians will not develop nuclear weapons, but it's a country which is a very difficult country when it comes to human rights and we cannot have blind eyes on all this. I think, first of all, the Americans learned, and we in the West learned, that it will not be possible to oppose democracy from outside. We had very bad experiences when we tried to do so. Look at the Iraq and what happened there. On the other hand side, I think we have some capabilities to support the democratic opposition in those countries, to give them our support when they try to work there in their limited space, which I can use to give them support through. We did, remember, Radio Free Europe was a major instrument fighting against the ideology of the communist system. Sometimes I ask myself why we do not have something like this in the social media today. So, but to be honest, I cannot see that we will reach our targets by listing a lot of sanctions and then by decoupling from those countries, it's a much more difficult task to do. But we have some instruments, but it will not come from outside to turn dictators and authoritarian regimes to a more democratic system. At the end of the day, you need the support and the movement inside the countries.
Because you briefly mentioned Iran, that is also one of the problems that have to be taken care of. So, John Emerson, do you think the US will rejoin the nuclear deal, the agreement that Trump has left, and will it be possible to rejoin it the way it was, or does it have to be reinvented?
The answer to your second question is it absolutely is going to have to change. I mean, it's, circumstances have changed, circumstances on the ground have changed since we pulled out of the JCPOA, which, by the way, was not just a US-Iran agreement. It was a US, Germany, France, England, Russia, China, EU, Iran agreement. But when we pulled out of that, Iran is now much closer to developing a nuclear weapon, and that needs to be dealt with. They've made progress in terms of their missile delivery systems. That needs to be dealt with. And of course, there's the, state-sponsored terrorism that was not initially part of that agreement that needs to be dealt with as well. Now, if I'm Iran, I'm sitting there saying, well, I don't know, you guys pulled out of it the last time. What kind of assurances are we going to have that that's not going to happen with another president in another 2.5, 3 years, depending upon whether how long it takes the Biden administration to get back at this. So, if I have no inside knowledge on this, but just reading the statements from President-elect Biden during the campaign and from his advisors, it's clear that rejoining and re-engaging in the multilateral institutions that we helped to create, and in some of these multilateral agreements, Paris Climate Change Agreement being top of the list, which I think on day one is something that the president-elect, plans to rejoin. The getting into the redoing or restructuring the JCPOA will be critical, but it is not going to be easy.
Sigmar Gabriel, would you like to comment on Iran? Because I think maybe resetting also for the German-American relationship is not so easy. Maybe it has to be reinventing all over in many different areas, also Iran. Oh, I think we can't hear you right now. You have to unmute.
You're muted, Sigmar. There you go.
I totally agree to John, because yes, we are hoping, and I'm absolutely convinced that that will happen, that the US will be back on stage in the negotiation with Iran. And maybe we can, it's not, I think it's not possible only to go back to the old agreement. There's something we should add. And I remember in the first days of the Trump administration, when they had the Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, which wanted to influence the president not to cancel the JCPOA. He told us, look, give me an argument how I can convince our president, because whenever I enter the Oval Office, he puts his gun on my head when I am speaking out the word JCPOA. And then we started as Europeans, without the US, we call it second track, to negotiate with the Iranians about all the difficult behaviors in the region. So what they are doing in Iraq, what they are doing in Lebanon, and so where they are the spoilers. And the Iranians accepted it. That was interesting. To keep the JCPOA in place, they were at that time willing to negotiate on the second track, not inside the JCPOA. They always rejected the idea to have a common negotiation, but a second track where we could debate and discuss the situation in Yemen, in Lebanon, in Iraq, and others. And I think that's what's necessary now. go back. Yes, okay. We hope we can stop the nuclear development in the Iran, and then we can try to be much more engaged in economics. But we need a second track to address all the difficult behaviors of the country in the region. And at the end of the day, I think we need, is far away, but we need something like a security structure in the region for the Iranian neighbors, but to be honest, also for Iran, because they remember that the West did not say a single word when in 1981 Saddam Hussein used poisoned gas to attack the Iranians. So they have their own memories. Not only we and the US have our memories in 1979 and so on, they also have their memories. And to negotiate with them about all these other issues, that's what I would say is needed.
Let's get a little bit closer back to the German-American relationship. I'll read a question to you, if I may. The Trump administration has created a, let's say, specific image of the US and Americans in general, and some prejudices have been deepened. What will the Biden administration do to overcome some of that and to have a fresh start for a new agenda? So this is more, I would say, a little bit more an emotional question also. So how can we get back on track so we like each other again?
Well, I think we're off to a good start. I mean, Joe Biden has made clear, not just in his words, but in his initial appointments, as it relates to the transatlantic relationship, we're back. We are going to be engaged. It is the end of America first means America withdrawing. Obviously, every president cares about putting America first in the sense of what's in America's interest, but it takes a little bit of a deeper understanding of what that means to understand that putting America first often means working closely with and collaborating with our allies. As I said before, having these close values-based alliances is something Russia doesn't have, China doesn't have, others of our competitors or adversaries don't have, and it's hugely, hugely important. So I think the appointments of people who are familiar to many in the capitals of Europe who are engaged in foreign policy, I think will be important. The tone, the change of tone, I think is dramatic and will be seen as such. I am certain there will be some quick symbolic moves, whether it may not be travel because of COVID, but certainly electronic travel, and then once travel is available, that will send a signal about the United States re-engaging, rejoining. If you think about the big issues that we face globally, whether it's a health pandemic, the movement of displaced people and refugees, the climate crisis, maybe top of the list, nuclear proliferation. All these issues, democratization, trying to support democratization, which has really been under attack, including in our own country, including by our current president. There's a lot we need to do, and that really is best done when we work together. And I think you'll begin to see some of those signals pretty quickly coming out of the Biden administration. I just remind people, there's a lot of garment rending about our relationship. And, let's remember, we lived through the whole Pershing missile situation. We lived through the Iraq War, Abu Ghraib situation. We lived through the WikiLeaks and, 6 weeks after my arrival as ambassador, Handygate, where our relationship with Germany in particular was quite low. And we were able to rebuild and recover from that. So, relationship never goes in a straight line. There's a lot of this, but there's no doubt in my mind that we're moving up towards the upper right quadrant in that, and that the first steps that we've seen just now from the Biden administration are indicative of that.
Friends are allowed to have a difference of opinion, and there is a difference of opinion in one particular case. It's Nord Stream 2, the gas pipeline from Russia to Germany. Sigmar Gabriel was a fervent supporter of that. He knows everything about it. He's now in the Deutsche Bank and also knows that sanctions that still President Donald Trump would like to imply would hurt the Deutsche Bank, would also hurt Germany. So America, and also as far as I know, Joe Biden are not really happy about Nord Stream 2. So how is that going to play out, Sigmar Gabriel?
No, of course, it's I would say a bipartisan position that Nord Stream is seen in America as a threat against the Western alliance, and on a long-term perspective, a threat against Germany. And the Americans, our friends, do not understand why we think that's in our interest. That's by sure the position, not only on the Republican side, but also on the Democratic side. And that's the opinion of the president-elect Joe Biden. Me, and not only me, the governments of Germany, I think since Nord Stream 1 is started, was always supportive for this pipeline project, because what the Americans maybe have not seen is that, this is part of the liberalization of the gas market in Europe, which I would say is very much in the interest of our Europeans. And if one partner like Russia would cut off the gas pipeline to Europe, today we would be able in a second to get other suppliers in other parts of Europe, because our gas infrastructure is so interconnected. We wanted to have a framework which is regulated by the European Union, but inside the framework, our companies should decide from where they would like to buy their energy resources. That's the concept why we as politicians would not intervene in the energy market. This is a decision 10, 15 years ago, which was part of the liberalization of the gas market. Before, we had a situation where you have different political interventions in the market, mostly not because of political issues, because of securing the own market, subsidizing the own companies. And so that's the consequence of this development. I respect the arguments of our American friends, and I would say what should be possible is to discuss the energy issue on a broader perspective. Let's start with the climate argument, because on the long term, or I would say on the short term, we as Europeans, as Germans, we will not reach our climate targets without reducing massively our gas consumption for heating our buildings. So there is a connection between climate and energy, and maybe we should offer our American friends a broader cooperation, for example, in hydrogen, with the three MARES initiatives of the East Europeans, which are a competitive initiative to Nord Stream, and some others. And then maybe the single pipeline will not become such a huge point of discussion like it was before. So I would like to start with the Americans, or I would be in the government, I would ask the Americans, what's the agenda on the energy and the climate side? Maybe we will find 5 or 10 bullet points, and one of them is Nord Stream. And then maybe it's not so difficult to find a solution than if you have only one bullet point and you're always struggling about the same point. Going back to sanctions, I mean, the Nord Stream 2 is not the first pipeline when America put sanctions on the Russian-German gas pipeline. It started in 1962. There we had the first sanctions from the Americans against a German-Russian gas pipeline. Then we had it in 1980, the Mannesmann pipeline to Russia. It was Ronald Reagan, the leader of the West. In 1980, it was not the American president. We remember 1989, it was the leader against the communist system. he said in Moscow, that's the center of the devil. He lifted the sanctions against Germany because he said there is a broad broad number of common interests. I don't want to have a single issue point where our relationship to Germany comes under pressure, and then we are not able to go through all the common interests we have. So that would be my approach, to say, okay, there's one thing we disagree. Let's look, are there many other issues where we can agree on? I would say over the time, the gas consumption in Europe will have less importance than they have today if we wanted to reach our climate targets. So that would be my approach to discuss with our American friends.
Let me just
sanctions, excuse me, John, but sanctions between allies is probably not a very good start to a relationship. So will there be possibilities to solve that problem?
You want me to answer that? Let me just step back a minute. Now, I was involved in very forcefully making the argument against Nord Stream 2 when I was part of the Obama administration. But our opposition to it certainly had nothing to do with so we can sell liquefied natural gas to Germany, which was part of the Trump argument. It was because we were concerned, and let's take us back to where we were at that point. We had Russia in effect infiltrating the Donbass. We had the illegal annexation of Crimea. We had Ukraine dependent economically on the transit fees for the gas that was coming through their country. And there was great concern on our part from a geopolitical standpoint that, and geostrategic standpoint, that if Nord Stream 2 were to go through, it would in effect allow Russia to have even a greater stranglehold on Ukraine and Ukraine's economy than it currently had. And that going forward with this pipeline at the same time when Germany was taking a leadership role when trying to get sanctions from the EU against Russia because of what was happening in the Ukraine, was a little counterproductive. So that was sort of where, where all this started from, and it clearly evolved. I would say, and obviously I can't comment on where we're going to be on sanctions. That's a decision for the Biden administration, to reach in terms of that. But Sigmar's point about looking at this in a broader context, I think is a really important point. And it not only applies to Nord Stream, it also applies to the whole concept of burden sharing. And what happened during the Trump administration is there was so much focus placed on the 2 or 3 areas where we had disagreements, and the decibel level was raised so high that it basically seemed like that was all that mattered in the relationship. And those issues matter, but they matter in a much, much broader context. And I think that the idea of, I forget who said this, it may have been Henry Kissinger, it may have been George Shultz, but one of our esteemed secretaries of state said at one point, if you got a problem you're having trouble to solve, enlarge it. And that's kind of what Sigmar is talking about here. Let's enlarge the energy discussion so that it is not just focused on this, but it's focused on the entire climate situation. I would say the same thing on burden sharing. Burden sharing isn't just about how much money do you pay for NATO, which Germany had committed to under the Obama administration in the 2014 Wales summit. This wasn't something that Donald Trump came up with. It was something they obviously, as I said, raised the decibel level on. But burden sharing is also about playing much more of a leadership role jointly in addressing world events. One of your questioners, I was just looking on the chat, asked a question about a commentary today in the New York Times where President-elect Biden said, effectively America is not going to be the world's policeman anymore. That's kind of what, it's not mean America withdrawing. It's basically saying, hey, there are a whole lot of issues where we ought to join arms and work on these together. And this topic, I remember one of the highlights of my time in Germany was very early on on the day of reunification, October 3rd, 2013, when President Gauck made a very powerful speech where he talked about Germany is no longer an island. We need to be more engaged. And then at the succeeding Munich Security Conference, Ursula von der Leyen and Foreign Minister Steinmeier, both really reiterated that point with some depth and substance added to it. That was a very, very good thing and a move in the right direction. And I think we need to enlarge these problems and look at them in their much broader sense. That is what makes the most sense. Not just so we quit arguing, because we won't quit arguing about everything, but so we're actually moving forward in addressing these big issues in a very, very genuine and impactful way.
Every time the German foreign minister, Heiko Maas, comes to New York, he talks at the United Nations about multilateralism and how important it is and how committed Germany is to it. So with multilateralism, of course, you have duties, and it can be expensive and uncomfortable and complicated, like the status of the German-American relationship. Sigmar Gabriel, to take your turn on that, are we ready for real multilateralism, meaning Germany also taking part in not only financially, but maybe even militarily?
Sometimes I think multilateralism is a buzzword. If I listened to the Chinese leader Xi Jinping in Davos when he said China is a committed multilateral country, I thought by myself, okay, there's something like multilateralism à la carte. So whenever it helps your country, you are a multilateralist. If not, you're against it. So what does it mean in practice? So your question is absolutely right. I think it means that we will have a common but shared responsibility, for example, in security issues. The United States will, as I said, much more present and orientated in the Indo-Pacific. And if they are withdrawing, and they will be less strong in the European neighborhood, then you can see what's happening if Europe is not stepping in. Then all the others are trying to fill the vacuum. Where the Americans left the streets, you'll see the Russians, the Turkish, you see Iran, you see the Arab Emirates. They all try to fill the vacuum. The only region which is not there is Europe. And that has, of course, a lot to do also with the German perspective. Because of our history, we are very much reluctant for military engagement. But on the other hand side, I mean, sometimes it's necessary to have a power projection. If not, you will be seen as the last vegetarians in the world of carnivores. And now when the Brits are leaving the European Union, we will be seen much weaker than before. So there is something we have to do. First of all, we have to develop a common perspective to the world as Europeans. If you look what's happening in Libya, different European member states are supporting different parts of the civil war there. So we have to learn to have the same perspective. And then we need a strategic debate. I mean, I'm absolutely against the idea of strategic autonomy, because I think this is the idea of bowling alone. I mean, even America will not be strong enough to bowl alone in the 21st century, and Europe definitely will not be strong enough to do so. So strategic sovereignty, that we can decide what we want to do, fine. But I don't want to have an autonomous situation. I want to join hands with the Americans, but to have shared common but shared responsibilities when it comes to security and also to defense. And there, Europe and Germany, we have to step up, no doubt. And because, I mean, the most European-orientated American president, with a lot of sentiment for Europe, at the end of the day, he will ask, what's the added value? What Europe can put, which kind of weight we could put in the global competition. And so I would say our weight is not big enough. We do not have in economics, technology, and also defense and strategic capabilities. So that's something we have to learn. That's not so easy because Europe was founded not to have strategic capabilities, not to be a global actor. And after more than 70 years, we have to turn around these ideas and to be a global actor, not an autonomous global actor, but with own capabilities, where others, like the Americans, say there is added value to join hands with the Europeans.
Yes, how strong is Germany? That's a good question. And also, we are looking at Joe Biden as the incoming president, and we are all trying to figure out how he will deal with us. But vice versa, America is probably looking back and saying, wow, 21, Merkel is not going to run again. So 16 years of stability, if it's liked by one party or the other or not, 16 years of one person everybody could relate to, are coming to an end. She survived 3 American presidents. So what is going to come afterwards? How worried is the other side of the Atlantic about who is going to take over?
I'm not sure worried would be the right word. I think interested and hopeful would be the right word. I think that clearly we would not want to see I mean, I don't see this happening, but a sort of a flip back to much more of a populist sort of adversarial approach coming through the next campaign. I think most people assume that we're looking at a black-green coalition and would be comfortable with that. Be comfortable with another grand coalition from that standpoint, but you won't see the leadership of the United States government sort of engaging in, this one versus that one, but there will certainly be keen interest in that election. A couple of points just to make there, though. It is absolutely in the United States national security interest and international economic interest for there to be a strong and independent Europe. I mean, that is very much in our interest. And so I think the question has been, Angela Merkel has been a force for that in terms of, at least for European integration and trying to hold things together. And so I think there's a little bit, to the extent there's any concern, it's anytime you replace a seasoned leader who has lots and lots of relationships and understands the subtleties and nuances with somebody new, there's going to be a learning curve in terms of helping to make that happen. And so I think that happens in our country too. When we get a governor from a state like Arkansas or a state like Texas, or a 4-year senator from a state like Illinois, all of a sudden becomes president. There is a learning curve. The good news on this front is there is no learning curve with Joe Biden. The guy is unquestionably the most prepared person ever to take the reins of the presidency in the United States, even more so than the previously most prepared person, who was the first President Bush, President George H.W. Bush. So I think that's good. So I'd say that with interest and hope, but also a recognition that there may take some time as that person gets their sea legs in the international community.
So what does the former boss of the Social Democrats have to say to that?
Unfortunately, John is right that it's relatively sure that we will have a conservative green government. I mean, a year is a long time in politics, but if the election would be tomorrow, I would say this would be the outcome. But as a citizen of Germany, I would say, look back to what is the experience of our friends around the globe with Germany, the Federal Republic, before and after the reunification. The experience is there was no change by 180 degrees in foreign policy, whoever was chancellor and whoever was foreign minister. Sometimes we needed a coalition to handle with difficult issues like a green Secretary of State when we had the first military intervention of Germany and the former Yugoslavia. I don't want to know what would have happened at that time when we would have a conservative government and not a social democratic and green ones. So, and look to the Agenda 2010, the reform policy of Gerhard Schröder together with the Greens. So sometimes we will see that governments which have a certain image will do it in practice the other way around because it's necessary. It's in the interest of the country. And we always were a country where our neighbors and friends and allies and our antipodes, they always knew that we are going a very, very clear course, and there was no shift by 180 degrees or even less when it comes to government change. So I think this is something where the Americans can trust on.
Many Germans and many Americans have contributed a lot to the German-American friendship. 2 days ago, we lost one of them, Guido Goldman. He was a very influential person for the American Council, for the Atlantik-Brücke, the German Marshall Fund. So would you like to say a few words about him, maybe to commemorate him?
Well, I first got to know Guido towards the end, actually, of my time as ambassador. And it was at a time I was joining the German Marshall Fund board and then, of course, assuming my responsibility shortly thereafter here with the American Council on Germany. We spent a lot of time together, actually, during that time. He was a real icon to the transatlantic relationship. I mean, he came up with the idea of the German Marshall Fund. I mean, he's recognized as the founder in that sense. And he was a true Renaissance man. I mean, just thoughtful, generous, interesting. His investments in the world of art, his just knowledge of literature and particularly of history, and his absolute devotion to the transatlantic relationship. He left quite a legacy, and he left us too soon. He was in his early 80s, which the older I get, the younger that feels. And he is a loss, but boy, has he left a great legacy. And I think his legacy is reflected even in this conversation here this morning or this afternoon for those of you in Europe. So I just express that appreciation.
I don't know if Sigmar Gabriel has met him. Probably yes.
Of course,
So
I met him several times at the Center for European Studies, the Minder de Gunzburg Center in Harvard, where he worked many years, and he founded the Center for the Studies on Germany, and he was really a great friend of Germany and Europe, a great person, by the way. And I had the honor to meet him several times and to hold a Guido Goldman lecture when he was there, and I was appointed as the senior fellow at Harvard. I mean, he did really a lot. I mean, everybody should know his family history was, of course, Jews who fled from Europe to the United States. Nahum Goldman, his father, founded the Jewish Congress, and he was very much engaged in the relationship between Jews and the Jewish Congress and the Federal Republic of Germany. And Guido was a great friend of Germany, despite the horrible history of the Shoah and what people in my country did in the past. So that he passed away, it's a very sad day. Yesterday I heard it from Harvard. And maybe at the Atlantik-Bridge, we should develop an idea how to remember Guido Goldman and how to memorize once a year to his work for German-American friendship.
Thank you for that. We have to come to an end. I just, as a very last request, I would ask you to tell me what your favorite wish is for the transatlantic relationship. And even though I know it's not easy for you to answer in short sentences, please be disciplined. Just a very brief wish.
my wish is that it is renewed, resuscitated, and enlarged over the coming years.
And I hope that the most important foundation will come back for our German-American friendship. That's that people can travel from Germany to the United States and the other way around, because that's the solid fundament of our friendship, to meet each other. And so I wish that it will be possible as soon as possible.
Let's get that vaccine.
Thank you. Total agreement here on all fronts. Thank you very much for joining us both, Ambassador John Emerson and Sigmar Gabriel from Germany. And I'll wrap it up with David Deissner, the CEO of Atlantik-Brücke. I give it right back to him. Thank you for having all of us.
Thank you so much. Not a lot to ask, not a lot to add at the end here. It's good to end the call on a positive note. Of course, we are looking forward to traveling on the other side of the Atlantic and to actually again meet in person. John Emerson, Sigmar Gabriel, many thanks to both of you for your clear and as always very thoughtful comments. Many thanks to you, of course, dear Christiane Meier, for guiding us through this discussion. I think it's fair to say we certainly covered a lot of ground. We talked about to again quote Tony Blinken, the artificial trade war, and we hope that this will end. We talked about China, the transatlantic approach to China, 5G, human rights, Iran, JCPOA, Nord Stream 2, and how to broaden the debate around energy security. We are indeed opening a new chapter in transatlantic relations, and as John emphasized, we can rightfully assume that the US will come back to a value-based foreign policy that will not only be a change in tone, but in substance and in strategy. And this will certainly offer new opportunities, not only for policymakers, but also for our institutions, for Atlantik-Brücke and the American Council, as conveners, as platforms for debate. One thing is clear, we have a lot of work ahead of us, but what can make us more optimistic and what is more reassuring than to know that with the two of you, John Emerson and Sigmar Gabriel, we have two very thoughtful political animals, as it were, as our chairman, who will continue to devote all their energy to transatlantic relations. Again, thank you so much for taking the time for today's call. Thank you to our audience for your thoughtful questions. We wish you all a very happy festive season. And for now, have a good afternoon and thank you for joining us. Goodbye.
Goodbye.